Hello viewers. We have agreed in the earlier episode that cinema has language-like qualities. Cinema may not be a fully developed language like English or Hindi, but it definitely has language-like qualities because that's how cinema makes meaning and it tells us such wonderful stories. So when we apply the laws of semiotics or the laws of linguistics to cinema, we have to examine how cinema conveys causality, that means one incident is the cause of another incident, successivity, meaning one incident precedes another incident, this incident happens first and then this incident happens, like that. Spatial proximity or spatial distance, then temporal breaks, adversity between two characters, that these two characters do not exactly see eye to eye with each other. All these things are necessary for telling a story, and cinema conveys all these things. So we have to examine that how these meanings are made in this medium of cinema. Now, Christian Metz, who was the first person to apply the laws of linguistics to cinema, he wrote this book, Film Language, in the year 1968. And obviously, he argued that cinema is structured like a language. So, he said that we would not call cinema a lang. Langue, lang, means it's a well-developed, well-structured language. But on the other hand, we can say cinema as a language. So language itself means that it is language-like. But lang is something that is very well structured, like our verbal language. So cinema cannot be regarded as comprising a lang in the sense of having a strict syntax, but it can be called a language. And I would like to tell you one thing, that Metz applied his laws, semiotics, to narrative cinema only. That means the feature films that tell us stories, the films that we watch in the movie halls, to those films only. Because he argued that in the early years, cinema served many a purpose. Cinema was used for documenting an important event or archiving a particular incident, or it was used for educational purpose. There were actuality films which later developed into documentaries, and slowly in the hands of people like Griffith and Porter, cinema as a narrative medium developed. And today, the narrative potential of cinema has been exploited to its full, and that is the dominant mode, that is the dominant genre of cinema that the wider public is exposed to. And so he decided to apply his principles of linguistics to this narrative films only. And he argued that similar subcodes can be derived for documentaries or ad films or any other educational films or any other kind of films, that how these make meaning, how these create an impact in the mind of the public. But Metz concerned himself only with narrative films. And he applied the semiotics of denotation. To begin with, he didn't go into the connotation part at all, that is making shades of meaning. He concentrated first and foremost on denotation, that principally how cinema makes meaning, how it denotes the basic storyline. Okay, he concerned himself with that. So he said that one particular shot, if you take the shot of a building, it's okay, it's a shot of a building. But the moment you start taking a series of shots and you start putting the shots together, then a discourse is built. A shot per se doesn't have a discourse. It's like a statement. But to make a discourse, to initiate a discourse, you have to have a number of shots and put them together in a particular way. And that's how, in the process of building a discourse through shots, the language of cinema has developed, which there is another term for it. It's called diachronic maturation. Diachronic means over a period of time. Something that develops over a period of time, that's called diachronic. So the language of cinema has developed over a period of time through usage in the hands of masters like Griffith, Porter and Eisenstein and so on and so forth. So there has been a diachronic maturation of the language of cinema. There are no two opinions, there cannot be two opinions about it. And those who are a little exposed to making films, those who are a little experienced in making films, you would agree that a film haphazardly put together cannot be understood, cannot be comprehended. So there has to be a logic. When you put the shots together, there has to be a logic. So it is the denotation itself that is being constructed, organized, and to a certain extent codified. And there are no absolute laws of this codification, but still how we make meaning, that depends on our habits of viewing. All right, so certain things have got codified through dominant habits because we are exposed to, or we are used to certain kinds of codification. Now, although each image is a free creation, the arrangement of these images are into an intelligible sequence, which is called a montage, that is arranging of these images into an intelligible sequence, that brings us to the heart of the semiotic dimensions of the film. Now, to speak a language is to use it. Now, in the case of cinema, there is a small group of people, which is the filmmakers, who are using the language to make films, and there is a much wider audience who are the users, who are watching the movies and who are making meanings out of it. All right. So on one hand, there is a small group of creators, and on the other hand, there is a large mass of spectators. So therefore, the users of cinema have these two distinct categories, because cinema is a one-way communication. So we have to also understand things from the user's point of view, that is from the spectator's point of view, that how he is making meaning of the movies that he is watching. So now we come to these conventions. Now, through usage, what we see that although an image can be taken in an infinite number of ways, but when you watch movies, movies are there are only a certain kinds of ways in which a movie, limited kinds of ways in which a movie makes meaning. All right. So therefore, when you are putting these images together, only certain kinds of codifications work. Although theoretically there can be infinite possibilities of the ways you can put the shots together, but only a few limited kinds of codifications seem to be working and seem to be making meaning. And that is the synchronic state of cinema. That means after going through a diachronic maturation, now it has come to a state of stability, where certain codifications have been formed through repeated use, through habitual viewing, and those are the codes that are being repeated in films, and those are the codes that seem to be making meaning, as opposed to infinite number of possible juxtapositions that can be possible. So a film sequence is a sort of coherent syntagma within which the shots react semantically to each other, just the way words react to each other in a sentence. So that's what we understand. Now, what are the units of signification? When we are talking about a sequence, analyzing a sequence, what are the units of signification? Now, Metz said that there are basically two units of signification. One is the shot, which is equivalent to a statement or a sentence, and the other is an optical device like a dissolve or a wipe or an iris or a fade or a bleach. Those are like filmic punctuations that separate large complex statements. All right. So therefore, these are these optical devices, and there are the shots. These are the two units of signification that one can identify in any movie sequence that one sits down to analyze. So after watching a large body of films belonging to different genres, Metz came up with 8 syntagmas. He could identify 8 syntagmatic categories, and we shall now see what are these 8 syntagmatic categories. To begin with, the first one is the autonomous shot. There can be 2 types of autonomous shots. One is the sequence shot. That means that in one entire sequence is constructed in one shot. It is rare, but it is possible. In a film like Birdman, or there is a film called Victoria, it's a recent film, you will see that then it's a long take, and then one entire sequence is made up of one shot. Of course, the camera is moving, so that is a sequence shot. The other type of autonomous shot is an insert, which you see in a sequence. Okay. Now, there are 4 kinds of inserts. Non-diegetic insert, which is in a film like Eisenstein's Strike, in the sequence where the last sequence where the army is massacring the workers, the striking workers, in between suddenly you see that a bull is being butchered and a lot of blood is flowing. So that's a non-diegetic insert because the bull in no way belongs to the world of the narrative, but it has been inserted to convey a sense of brutality. So that's a non-diegetic insert. Then you can have displaced diegetic insert. Say party scene, suddenly you show something that is happening outside the party. Okay, so that's a displaced diegetic insert. Then you have a subjective insert. Subjective insert is somebody's thought process, somebody's apprehension or dream or imagination. So you see flashes of these shots which are going on in the minds of a particular character. That is a subjective insert. And the fourth kind of insert is explanatory insert. Like you take a tight close-up of the watch, the dial of a watch, because you want to highlight the time. Or you take a close-up of, say, somebody's eyes to show that the person is on the verge of tears. Okay, so that is to highlight, to draw viewers' attention to one particular aspect or one particular thing in the scene. So that is called a explanatory insert. So autonomous shot is of two types, sequence shot and insert, and within insert you can identify 4 types of inserts. The second syntagma is called parallel syntagma. Now in parallel syntagma, you can alternate between 2 contrasting ideas. Say for example, hunger and wastefulness. A group of people are wasting food contrasted with a group of people who are standing in the queue just to get a spoonful of rice. All right, or contrasting between the ideas of confinement and the idea of freedom. So you are alternating between the two, creating a contrast to build up a certain emotion. And when you are alternating between these 2 shots, these 2 shots are in no way maybe connected temporarily or spatially. There is no narrative connectivity between these 2 shots. They are just put together to create a contrast. All right, so that is called a parallel syntagma. So both autonomous shot and parallel syntagma are non-chronological because when the shots are put together, there is no chronological ordering between the shots. So these are called non-chronological syntagma. Then we have this bracket syntagma. Bracket syntagma is also a non-chronological syntagma. So I give you an example of bracket syntagma. Supposing you are making a film on volcanoes and you have compiled a number of shots of volcanoes at different places. So Mount Vesuvius, Mount Etna, Mount Fujiyama, then the volcano in Andaman Islands. Okay, so these shots are taken at different points of time at different places, but they all convey the same idea. So they all can be bracketed together as examples of volcanoes. So that forms a bracket syntagma. So bracket syntagma is also non-chronological because there is no temporal connectivity between the shots that are put together. So that is bracket syntagma is the third kind of syntagma. Now we come to the chronological syntagma. So first chronological syntagma is a descriptive syntagma. Descriptive syntagma describes a place. So supposing you want to establish a particular location. So you first show a long shot. Then you cut to the mid close-up of a river that is floating by. Then you cut to one person who is singing and coming from a far distance. Then you cut to a bird sitting on a treetop and singing. And all these shots you put together to establish that particular location. So that is a descriptive syntagma. And all these things are happening simultaneously. That means supposing 4 shots you put together in an order 1, 2, 3, 4, you can also interchange 1, 3, 4, 2 and the meaning will not change. Alright, because all these things are simultaneously present in the place, but you are putting them sequentially. Alright, so there is a simultaneity. In a descriptive syntagma, the relationship between the shots is that of simultaneity. Okay, then we have alternate syntagma, which is very common in films. Now, alternate syntagma is also called parallel cut sequence, where two things are happening simultaneously at two different locations, and you are cutting from one to the other, and eventually you are building a climax, and at the climactic point the two meet. This is something that was initiated by Griffith. He took it to a level of perfection, but then this is done in so many films and it always works. Alright, then we have a linear narrative syntagma, which is the most common form of syntagma, which is called the scene. In fact, in the early days of cinema, you had only these scenes. Later on, these parallel cut sequences and other syntagma developed. Alright, so how do you define a scene? That within a scene, there is spatial and temporal continuity. Okay, so you can have a conversation scene, two people having a conversation. So you first show a two shot, then you show over the shoulder shot of one person, then you show over the shoulder shot of the other person. So like that, you build up a scene. Alright, so that is a conversation scene. Similarly, you can have a party scene, you can have a fight scene in a pub. So like that. So those are all scenes, and that is called a linear narrative syntagma. Alright, there is a gradual flow of time through the shots, and there is continuous, temporality and spatiality, both continuities are there. Then we come to this episodic syntagma. If you have to cover a large span of time, then you can build an episodic syntagma. And a beautiful example is the breakfast table sequence which you see in the film Citizen Kane. Now, to show the deteriorating relationship between Kane and his first wife, there is this breakfast table scene that both of them, every day they are meeting at breakfast, but the distance between them is growing, they are talking less and less, and there comes a time when they have nothing to talk, both of them are reading newspapers. And so from whenever you are cutting from one shot to another, you are not cutting, it's a straight cut, but there is a swish pan. That means camera is very rapidly panning, and then you cut to the next phase in their lives where they are more separated. Okay, the relationship has cooled off. So like that, gradually deteriorating relationship over the years is shown in just about 2 to 3 minutes in that particular sequence. That's called an episodic syntagma. In Indian films, you often encounter these such episodic syntagmas in the song and dance sequences, because a large span of time, say maybe the couple falling in love, that is narrated through an entire just one song and dance sequence. Or if you recall, I don't know if you have seen Mother India, 1957 film Mother India, where when the husband leaves and the mother is left to fend for herself and her two small sons, how the entire family toils in the field, and how the two children grow up, that entire phase is shown through a song sequence. Alright, so that again is an episodic syntagma. So a large span of time condensed into one sequence forms an episodic syntagma. And then we come to the ordinary syntagma. Now, in ordinary syntagma also, we are seeing a large span of time is condensed, but here there are no optical devices or special means of showing the passage of time. We are just showing one small scene of a person's life, and then we are abruptly cutting to another phase. Like that, a large span of time is shown through little shots which are just put together. So therefore, the viewer skips the moments that have no direct bearing on the plot, and this is a syntagmatic type which is also very common in cinema. And unlike a scene, the individual shots are apt to unfold in several different locations. Several song and dance sequences in Hindi films also can belong to this ordinary syntagma, where each line of the song is sung at a different location, which you often see in Hindi films. So that also can be an ordinary syntagma. So between the shots, there is no spatial and temporal continuity, and the unnecessary or unimportant passages have deliberately been chucked out or lifted and thrown away in order to make the narrative more compact. So these are the various syntagmas that one notices. And it's quite striking that in so many movies that made so, and even today the movies are made, that only these 8 kinds of syntagmas are identifiable. And these are the syntagmas that make meaning. Now, it has to be understood that the film is understood. That means you have to put a film together so that it is understood. People comprehend, people understand what you want to convey. And that is why you have to stick to certain conventions, and these 8 syntagmas form conventions. The question here is that as the language of cinema further develops, will there be more syntagmas? Metz says that it is very unlikely. There may be subcategories formed among these broad 8 syntagmas, but it's very unlikely that more syntagmas will be invented as the language of cinema develops. And definitely, when you are seeing a 40s film, you know that it is old 40s film as compared to today's film. So just as spoken language develops over years, the language of cinema also develops over years. In fact, it develops faster than a spoken language because it is being practiced by a small group of people who are creative, who are experimenting, and through these experimentations, the language of cinema develops faster than any spoken language. Okay, but if as an individual filmmaker, if you suddenly break conventions and try something beyond these 8 syntagmas, you will maybe you won't make sense to your viewers at all. You will not be able to connect to your viewers. All right. So therefore, any development, in order to be imbibed into the language of cinema and in order to make sense, make meaning, takes time and takes repeated uses. So one particular individual cannot change the language of cinema. It takes that one entire generation or a big group of filmmakers practicing something, doing something repeatedly to bring it into a convention to develop the language of cinema. It is not one person's job to develop the language of cinema. So therefore, the language of cinema has evolved over the years. It will continue to evolve over the years. And because it is in the realm of art, the evolution of cinema is not exactly like the evolution of a language. But nevertheless, it continues to evolve, and we have to see in what direction the language of cinema goes, particularly in the digital technology, in this age of digital technology, where so many filmmakers are making different kinds of films, putting up on YouTube, sharing with each other. So definitely, because there is a flowering of filmmakers because of the ease of technology, the language of cinema is also undergoing a revolution. So we have to wait and see what turn the language of cinema takes. Thank you very much.